A black Navy SEAL is accused of assaulting a white police officer. There's no weapon, no footage, just one man's word against another's, and a system that's already decided which word to believe. When Tarek Dawson walked into that courtroom, he wasn't just a defendant. He was a threat to their image, their comfort, their control. The judge didn't even hesitate. "Cuff him," he ordered. Right there in front of everyone. No questions, no defense, just the cold, hard click of steel. But Tarek didn't panic, because he knew something they didn't. And in that quiet, suffocating room, the foundations of their power were about to crack. What kind of man can turn a courtroom built to crush him into a room forced to listen? He didn't walk like a guilty man. He didn't walk like a hero either. Tarek Dawson stepped through the courthouse doors in a plain gray suit. His shoes were clean but worn. There were no medals pinned to his chest, no lawyers flanking him like armor. Just him. A black man walking into a room full of white faces, knowing they'd already written his story. He glanced around once, just long enough to feel the chill. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from respect, but from expectation. The kind that says, "Sit down. Don't speak. We already know who you are." At the front sat Judge Whitmore. Silver hair, eyes like ice. He didn't look at Tarek. He just scribbled on a notepad, as if the verdict had arrived long before the defendant ever did. On the other side, at the prosecution bench, sat Officer Dwyer. Broad shoulders, a uniform pressed so sharp it looked like it was starched in hate. He had the same smirk he wore in the booking photo, the kind that says, "I got him." Not because of what Tarek did, but because of who Tarek was. The charge was simple: assaulting a police officer. But the story was anything but. No camera footage from the precinct. No bruises on Dwyer's body. No weapon. There was only a report and the unwavering word of a white cop against a black man. Tarek's court-appointed attorney, a young guy who looked like he was barely out of law school, leaned in. "Stay calm, Mr. Dawson," he whispered. "Don't speak unless you're asked." Tarek didn't respond. He just looked straight ahead, the same way he'd looked on missions when the world was ending around him, and someone had to hold the line. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat. "This court is now in session," he began, his tone sharp and final. He glanced at a file. "A decorated Navy SEAL. That's what I've been told." He looked up, a cold, casual dismissal in his eyes. One might expect better judgment from someone trained to protect the public, not attack its officers. Dwyer stood to give his statement, his voice loud, clear, and practiced. The defendant entered the station agitated, confrontational. When I asked him to remove his jacket, he refused. When I approached, he raised his voice and shoved me back. Heads in the jury box nodded. Not because they believed it, but because they wanted to. Fit. Tarek's voice, when it came, didn't rise. It didn't crack. It just filled the space. "I never touched him." The room went quiet again. But this time it was the sound of a truth they didn't want to hear. "We'll let the evidence speak, Mr. Dawson," Whitmore said. But there was no evidence. The body cam Dwyer claimed to have, the footage was corrupted. The station's security feed? Mysteriously unavailable. All that remained was testimony. And in this courtroom, testimony had a color. The young attorney stood, flustered. "Your Honor, we'd like to request a delay until the body cam footage can be recovered." "No," Whitmore snapped. "We will proceed." No hesitation, just command. He looked directly at Tarek, like a mechanic examining a broken part. "You may have worn a uniform once," he said, "but in this courtroom, you're just another defendant." The war Tarek thought he'd left behind had just changed battlefields. Dwyer stood before the court like a man rehearsing a ghost story. "He was unstable," he said, "aggressive in posture. I gave him 3 verbal commands. He ignored everyone." He paused for effect. "I feared for my safety." That last line was the dagger. Not because it was true, but because in a room like this, it didn't have to be. The judge leaned back, his expression a mask of bored authority. "It's amazing," he said to the jury, "how often evidence gets lost when someone's trying to delay the obvious. That line stuck. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a warning to anyone who might dare to believe Tarek. At the defense table, Tarek's hands were interlocked on his knees. He didn't move. He knew that in rooms like this, protest only fed the fire. Silence wasn't consent. It was survival. And then, Dwyer played his final card. He rose with a look of feigned concern. "Your Honor," he said, "based on the defendant's demeanor, I believe he may be emotionally unstable. For the safety of everyone here, I respectfully request that he be restrained." Tarek hadn't moved an inch, but Dwyer made it sound like a bomb was about to go off. Whitmore didn't even glance at Tarek. "Granted." The word fell like a guillotine. The bailiff hesitated for a split second, but orders were orders. He moved forward with the cuffs, and then something strange happened. Tarek didn't flinch. He didn't resist. He stood up slowly, deliberately, and extended both hands forward, wrists together. He held them out as if he'd been expecting this all along. And somehow, that quiet act of compliance was more unsettling than any fight could have been. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. From the back row, a woman's voice cut through the quiet. "This is wrong." Heads turned. She was trembling, not with fear, but with rage. "You all see what's happening," she said, louder now. "You're really going to sit there and act like this is normal? Order in the court." Whitmore slammed his palm on the bench. But the air had already cracked. Tarek looked at the judge, wrists now bound in steel, and said in that same calm, steady tone, "You're not restraining me. You're just comforting yourselves." The words hung in the air like smoke. Even Dwyer blinked. The courtroom grew quieter than it had all day. The jurors avoided eye contact. Tarek sat back down, cuffed, spine straight, eyes forward. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't begged for mercy. But he'd already told them everything. They just had to decide if they were willing to listen. Just as the judge was about to move on, the courtroom doors opened. A woman walked in. She was calm, but her eyes carried the kind of weight that comes from memory, not anger. In her hand, she held a small black hard drive. "Ma'am, you are interrupting a hearing," Whitmore said coldly. "My name is Dr. Nia Ellis," she replied, her voice controlled. "And I have the evidence this court has not seen. The footage that was deleted from the precinct server." A murmur went through the room. Dwyer's face went pale. "And how exactly did you come to possess this alleged footage?" Whitmore demanded. Dr. Ellis took a breath. "My ex-husband was Major Stephen Ellis. He served with Officer Dwyer until he realized Dwyer had a habit of escalating situations with black men. After Stephen died, I was sent his digital archives. It was there I found this. A backup Dwyer never thought anyone would see." "Inadmissible," the prosecutor stammered. "There's no chain of custody." But for the first time, Tarek's young lawyer stood tall. "Your Honor," he said, his voice suddenly clear and firm. "Under Rule 902, verified digital files may be admitted if their authenticity is uncontested. The department failed to provide the footage. This witness provides a version backed by metadata. To refuse to review it would be a willful denial of material evidence." Whitmore was cornered. He looked at Dr. Ellis, then at the drive, his jaw tight. "Fine," he spat. "Load it." The clerk plugged the drive into the courtroom monitor. The screen flickered to life. The footage was silent at first. It showed Tarek sitting calmly in a chair. Then Dwyer entered the frame. He jabbed a finger in Tarek's face. He paced. He slammed his palms on the wall inches from Tarek's head. Then the audio kicked in. "You think wearing that uniform makes you more than me?" Dwyer's voice was a low growl. "You people don't know your place anymore." Tarek didn't flinch. He just looked up. "You don't own me," he said, his voice low and even. "Not out there. Not in here." And that's when Dwyer grabbed Tarek by the shirt and shoved him backward. The chair toppled. Tarek hit the ground. He didn't strike back. He didn't even raise his hands to defend himself. The courtroom recoiled. A woman gasped. The final line from Dwyer, caught perfectly on camera, was chilling. "In this building," he hissed, "you're just another threat we're allowed to put down. Turn it off." Whitmore rose from his bench, his voice cracking. I said, "Turn it off." But no one moved. The footage ended, and the room was filled with a thick, scorched silence. The judge called for a recess, but when he returned, the air had changed. The courtroom doors opened again. A man in a crisp navy uniform walked in, silent as a shadow. He carried a slim, sealed envelope. He walked straight to the defense table, handed it to the lawyer, and left. The lawyer opened it. His eyes scanned the page and he turned to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "we've received an official communiqué from the Department of Defense. It's marked urgent." Whitmore took the letter. As he read, the color drained from his face. His hand trembled as he reached for the phone on his bench. He dialed. He listened. "Yes," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Yes, I understand." He hung up the phone. He looked smaller now, his robe like a shroud. "This court," he said, his voice hollow, "dismisses all charges against Mr. Tarek Dawson, effective immediately." He banged the gavel, but the sound was weak, pathetic. He practically fled the room. The bailiff moved to uncuff Tarek, his hands fumbling. As the steel fell away, Tarek stood up. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just stood there, a pillar of quiet dignity in the wreckage of a lie. And then it happened. In the back row, an old man, a veteran, slowly rose to his feet. He didn't clap. He just stood in silent respect. Then the woman who had shouted stood. Then Dr. Ellis. Then another and another. Black, white, young, old, one by one, the entire courtroom got to its feet. Not with cheers, but with a profound, breathtaking silence. It was a standing ovation without a single clap. A verdict delivered not by a judge, but by the conscience of a room that had been forced to see the truth. Tarek looked at the faces around him, a silent sea of recognition. He gave a single, slow nod, and then he turned and walked out of the courtroom, not as a man who had been freed, but as a man who had been free all along. He walked past the people who now saw him not as a defendant, not even as a Navy SEAL, but as something more. Something that made them all question their own silence. Because some stories remind us that real power doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It simply stands. It endures. And it changes the room just by being in it.